Welcome back to History 121 and in 1920s week. Today I want to talk about recovering from war and American culture and especially American politics of the 1920s. One thing I want to really express that I really want you to understand about American political culture in this era is this sense of returning to normalcy. First of all, normalcy isn't actually a word in the English language until Warren G. Harding says it to reporters during his campaign for president, and it really comes to symbolize Harding's administration and what he wants to do. Basically, he wants to return to a normal daily life, not just of life from before the war, but life from before the progressive or the populist movements. By 1920, there had been nearly 30 years of a constant push of some way, shape, or form to reform society. Oh, we need to get rid of booze. Oh, we need to let women drink or vote or drink. We need to, be fair to poor people. We need to do things for the immigrants. By the election of 1920, we have the evidence to show that people were just tired of a constant call and push for reform. And so in 1920, Harding will be elected as president, and it's a return of the conservatives to political power in the United States. People just want the status quo, and that's what the conservatives are going to give them. They're going to give them so much status quo that we're going to see the end of child labor laws. We're going to see the unions who have been pushing for, 12-hour days and 2 days off a week. We're going to see those unions have legal pushback. We're going to have a push to cut the personal individual income tax, even though we're paying for a war, by raising tariffs on imported goods. So really all of this is a pushback against everything that had been going on essentially for 30 years. People were sick of it. They didn't even care that Harding himself was breaking prohibition. Prohibition was still the law of the land at this time, and Harding openly drank in the White House. He had a mistress come and visit him in the White House on a regular basis. No one cared, because at least he wasn't telling us how bad we were and how much we needed to change. Harding's administration is going to be marked by a number of scandals. Honestly, it's going to be about the most scandal-ridden presidency since the Grant administration. The director of the newly created Veterans Administration, that body which is overseeing the health care and rehabilitation of America's veterans following the First World War, the director of that organization is openly arrested selling alcohol during Prohibition. Screw you guys, I'm in the government, I'm going to do what I want. Anybody want some whiskey? Anybody want some bathtub gin? I can get it for you. The other and probably the most famous scandal of the administration is Teapot Dome. The Secretary of the Interior, a man by the name of Albert Falls, pictured here, is responsible. Well, the Department of the Interior is responsible for land use and preservation and wise use of resources inside the continental U.S. and its possessions. Unfortunately, Mr. Falls is not the most ethically minded individual on the face of the planet. He is going to take a look at a set of land called Teapot Dome, which is a massive oil field in Wyoming. And he's going to say, hey, I could be not just the country could be making money off of this, I could be making money off of this. And you say to yourself, well, it's an oil field. Yeah, some companies making money off of it. Actually, no one was. Teapot Dome was an oil field that was set aside for the sole use of the United States Navy to fuel and provide petroleum products for the fleet and for all naval vessels and machines. So as such, it's a strategic set-aside. This would be like placing all the raw gasoline for the United States Army in one place, and then having the guy in charge of that stockpile of gasoline sell it off privately to friends of his for his own pocket. To hell with whatever the Army wants. That's exactly what Teapot Dome was. Falls leases the U.S. Navy's oil fields at the Teapot Dome oil field to friends of his, to oil field developers for $404,000 in personal kickbacks. He gets rich off of selling off the Navy's private oil supply to vendors and oil drillers. I don't know about you. That's probably one of the biggest. That's probably one of the biggest scandals of the 20th century. I think it makes Halliburton look almost like an amateur inside job. But these two scandals really kind of tip the hand of the Harding administration. No one's watching because no one cares, because no one wants reforms, and when the cat's away, the mice will play. Also in the 1920s, as we have again this push for a more conservative sense of politics, we get what we call the first Red Scare in American history. During the First World War, initially Russia had been on the side of the Allied powers, Great Britain and France, until the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, which displaces the Tsar, who will eventually be killed, and essentially the Bolsheviks pull Russia out of the war. They sign a separate peace agreement with Germany, saying that Russia will leave the war, will leave the alliance, just leave us alone. Don't fight us, get rid of the German troops on our frontier so we can take care of our own business over here. This makes communism, which had been kind of a behind-the-scenes buzzword for unions or social change or socialist ideas like a 5-day work week or a 40-hour week or unemployment insurance, that makes all of that previous use of the word communism a unified national threat. Now, if you're working to get your workplace unionized, you might be a communist, and a communist is a direct threat to the American way of life, as seen or portrayed by the media and the government. And so what we demand is a 100% Americanism. You have to believe in America and be a member of the right political parties and not question anything that America does, because if you do, you're a radical and a Bolshevik. It's like we have the advertisement here for Scott Tissue, the paper towels for the workplace. Is your washroom breeding Bolsheviks? Your employees are going to lose respect for you because they have dirty bathrooms and bad paper hand towels. And because of that, they're going to try and bring a union. They're going to join the Communist Party. They're going to destroy the American way of life because you have bad hand towels. Questioning working conditions is a sign of being a communist. Questioning how black people are treated, how Chinese people are treated, how Catholics are treated is a potential sign of communism and a violation of Americanism within our borders. We develop a really severe xenophobia, a fear of immigrants. There's always been a fear of immigrants in this country. The Irish were seen as subhuman. Uh, the Chinese were on the West Coast were seen as amoral. Um, Eastern Europeans were too Catholic and spoke unrecognizable languages. All of these groups had been seen as a threat, but now there's just a general threat that any immigrant coming in from overseas could be a communist and bringing that communist way of life with them. If you're not careful, they're going to take away everything you own and redistribute it. If you're not careful, they're going to take your house and take your kids and make them communists. And they're going to move people into your house, and there's not going to be any more private property. And the communists are going to destroy America. And in the name of 100% Americanism and saving the American way of life, the government's going to create the Federal Bureau of Investigation to try and ferret out Bolsheviks and communists from within American society. We're going to see a general infringement upon people's civil rights, and don't question it. We're going to spy on American citizens. We're going to follow them. We're going to arrest them without warrants. We're going to break up political meetings. We're going to break up union meetings and strikes because that's where dirty communists go. We'll even have the Palmer raids on potential communist members or Communist Party members' houses, arresting them, putting them in jail for their political beliefs. America hasn't always done a good job of holding itself up to the ideal that we talk about, but the Red Scare is the beginning of a prolonged period in American history where we really dropped the ball because of people's beliefs in other political systems. Part of that xenophobia is going to result in a couple of pieces of major immigration reform that are going to shape how people are able to enter the country basically until the 1960s. World War I ends in 1918, and let's face it, a good bit of Western Europe has been destroyed, especially France. It has been a major battlefield. Factories are destroyed, farms are destroyed. There's really a hard way of making a living. So we're going to see an uptick in immigration initially in the post-war period as people are looking to rebuild their lives and maybe start over from scratch. So we're going to see a flood of new immigrants coming into the United States. This is going to scare people, especially with the rise of that Red Scare and just a general fear of immigrants, period. So Congress in 1921 will pass the Emergency Immigration Act. And what that act says is that we're going to take the 1910 census as a baseline. And we're going to limit immigration to only 3% of any nationality represented in the United States Census in 1910. Well, what does that mean? That means that, well, we're going to basically we're setting a bar we're limiting the number of people able to enter into this country, and it's going to prefer people where we've had larger immigration backgrounds from. Yes, by 1921 we'll have had several thousand Chinese move to this country, several thousand other Asian people will have moved to this country. We'll have populations from Eastern Europe represented. We'll have populations from Mexico and Africa represented. And soon people are going to look back at that legislation and they're going to say, you're letting in too many Eastern Europeans. Those are the Bolsheviks. You're letting in too many Mexicans. You're letting in too many Chinese people. These people don't look like us. They don't really sound like us, and they scare us. And so in 1924, the quota on the Immigration Act is going to be changed. They're going to use the 1890 census as the basis for establishing the number of people of each nationality allowed into the United States. So what does that mean? Well, in 1890, we're not going to have as many Eastern Europeans. We're not going to have as many Italians. We're not going to have as many Chinese people. These are the groups of people that are most likely to be Catholic. They're going to have different personal behavior patterns. They're going to have different speech patterns than what we as a people are used to. These are the scary immigrants. It's going to allow in more English people, more Germans, or good Germans. It's going to allow more French people in, more Western European people in. Hey, they dress like us. We know somebody who speaks that language if we don't speak it ourselves. We're going to be able to assimilate these people into our society much easier than the Chinese or the Italian Catholic. For the next 40 years, American immigration numbers are going to be based off of the 1890 census, thus reinforcing Western European immigration and limiting immigration from areas of the world where we're generally seen as uncomfortable with those people because of the way they dress, act, speak, the foods they eat, the changes between our culture and theirs. The 1920s is also going to see the rebirth of the Ku Klux Klan. The Klan had risen out of the post-Civil War South as a means of keeping African Americans, quote unquote, in line with the Jim Crow laws and keeping them subservient to the white population. The Klan is going to be reborn out of the xenophobia of the 1920s, out of the fear of Catholics and those who challenge that true, pure Americanism that we spoke about earlier. The Klan is going to hate everybody. It's going to hate African Americans. It's going to hate Catholics. It's going to hate Eastern Europeans who don't sound like us. It's going to hate people that drink. It's going to hate anybody and everybody for any reason you can think of. The Jews aren't Christian. The Catholics aren't Christian. The Eastern Europeans, they're just babbling on when they talk, and they dress nasty, and their food smells disgusting. And so we're going to hate them. The Klan is going to support passing prohibition because obviously it's only the drunk immigrant that we need to worry about. The Irishmen are drunk. Catholics have wine at their Mass every week. They're promoting the use of alcohol. The Klan wants to standardize education, and I know we don't normally associate the Klan with education in this day and age, but back then, the Klan wanted a standard American education to indoctrinate everybody into the belief that white Anglo-Saxon Protestant men led society and good women supported them and stayed at home. It will grow from a regional institution to a national institution. They'll have parades everywhere. My grandmother, who died 2 years ago at the age of 98, remembered seeing Klan parades in our hometown that her father ushered her away from because they were an Irish Catholic family. This is a Klan parade in Washington, D.C. Look at the background of that picture. Yeah, that's the U.S. Capitol. The Klan unabashedly paraded right down Pennsylvania Avenue, right down through the heart of Washington, D.C., as the most American of organizations. And honestly, they were. By 1926, there were almost 6 million members. That's 20% of the white male populace in this country was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. In places like Indiana, in the Midwest, that number could be as high as 40%. Indiana is ideologically one of the most active states in the rebirth of the Klan. Dozens of her legislators, even members of Congress, were secret Klan members and Klan supporters, or sometimes rather publicly. the Klan was a large-scale political party in the 20s. It had a might. Honestly, in some ways, the rise of the Klan and the political power of the Klan, I would almost equivocate. It's hard to give a modern equivocation to what goes on. But essentially, this is the power of you look different than me, so I hate you, and therefore I'm going to join this group, and this group is going to be large and politically powerful because of my hatred rising up to the mainstream. As you can see, these people aren't even wearing masks. Why hide your face? Because everybody that's going to be at that parade supports you and thinks you're doing a great thing. Finally, one of the things that we have interesting that it goes on in the 1920s is what we call the Scopes monkey trial. You may have heard about this in some way, shape, or form. Essentially, in 1925, the state of Tennessee passed the Butler Act saying you could not teach evolution as fact in the classroom. That you had to stick with a biblical interpretation of world history and science. And it's passed by radicals, it's passed by these Klan style, small thinking, hyper conservative individuals. Not many people actually follow the law. Don't think when we think of the Scopes monkey trial, the Scopes trial, we think of this large scale. Everybody in America hates evolution. Everybody in Tennessee hates evolution, and it is this one scientific scholar who stands forward to defend the name of science, to defend the name of evolution, to defend education from the power of the balloted religious bigot. And yeah, it's not really the case. Mr. Scopes was a gym teacher and substitute science teacher in this small town in Tennessee. And the city father said, people have cars and money, and we would really like to have some tourism come to our town. How about we drum up a trial challenging the Butler Act? We'll have a real quick trial. People will come here because it's challenging the Bible, and we'll be famous for a little while, and people will spend their money here, and everything will be great. So they convince the gym teacher turned substitute teacher to allow himself to be imprisoned and charged with violation of the Butler Act. And from there, it explodes into national headlines. William Jennings Bryan, the man who gave the Cross of Gold speech, a very widely popular, nationally popular minister who has taken advantage of the radio and the press to keep his name in the political media for decades now, will show up uninvited in this small town, and he will ingratiate himself with the state to be the prosecutor defending the Bible and the word of the Lord against the heathen scientist. Clarence Darrow, probably one of the most famous humanist attorneys, one of the greatest attorneys of the early 20th century, a man known for questioning religious dogma, will hear of Jennings Bryan, and he will come to town and he will be the defense lawyer. Ultimately, Scopes, I need to see if I can remember this correctly. It's a horribly convoluted mess. There's a movie that's made in the 50s. It's remade later, called Reap the Wild Wind, I believe. It's a dramatization of the Scopes trial, and it really shows the circus that happened in this small town. People from all over, reporters from all over the nation, radio stations broadcast the Scopes trial live, all the way from Chicago. So the hope of getting a little bit of publicity was met and went so far out of hand that there was no room in the courtroom. They were drawing lots as far as who could um, go in and see it on a daily basis. Jennings Bryan makes it this great evangelical political um, pulpit for convicting America of the 1920s, um, for losing its conservative morals and allowing jazz and allowing, not being tougher on alcohol and letting women cut their hair because they'd gotten away from the Bible. And it's it's going to get so far that William Jennings Bryan will demand that he himself be put up on the stand in order to defend the word for word literal truth of everything printed in the Bible. It will end up being having a massive cross examination between he and Darrow, who is a noted atheist. They're going to have a 2 hour yelling match over the Bible's veracity versus scientific fact. Darrow will eventually ask the judge to bring in the jury. He will summarize saying that the defendant is not guilty, but as the court has excluded any testimony except as to the one issue as to whether he taught that man descended from a lower order of animals, and we cannot contradict that testimony, there is no logical thing to come except that the jury find a verdict that we may carry to the higher court. Purely as a matter of proper procedure, we do think it is fair to the court or counsel on the other side we do not think it is fair to the court or counsel on the other side to waste a lot of time when we know this is the inevitable result and probably the best result for the case. Scopes was never allowed to testify in his defense. Jennings Bryan is still attempting to create this great, grandiose defense of the Bible and a relaunch of his political career. And in 9 minutes, the jury found Scopes guilty. And everybody left town. That's it. That's the Scopes monkey trial. Sadly, William Jennings Bryan will die shortly after the trial. This is kind of seen as one of his last great stands in the public eye. Darrow will continue being a famous American lawyer. All that the Scopes monkey trial does is act as a place for a referral to a higher court. Um, the Tennessee Supreme Court will ultimately challenge, basically find that the Butler Act will be constitutional. Um, they will set aside the court on the Scopes verdict on a technicality, and it's really not until 1968 that we actually have a Supreme Court decision that says that bans on evolution and scientific teaching contravene the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. Um, Ironically, Tennessee repealed the Butler Act in 1967 before the Supreme Court decided that. It's all for naught. We remember it in popular culture as this great attack on science, this great question of is it science or is it religion, which is right? And to be honest, folks, it's like I said at the very first part of the slide. The entire reason it was done was for tourism. All right, that's all we have for today. Thank you very much for your attention. Our next lecture will be on science. No, not science. We're going to get away from science. We're going to go talk about agriculture and how the Great Depression actually started in 1919. Thank you.